Yeah, that's good.
Okay, we'll just kind of do this real laid back.
Mr. Brown, you talk about all the things that the Beatles asked you to do for them over the years. Was there anything that you ever refused to do for the Beatles?
I don't think so. I think probably because they never asked me to do anything that they didn't think that I'd be willing to do. I can't think of what that would be, except maybe get drugs or something like that. But no, I don't think that there was anything that I actually refused.
We hear in most big name rock groups that there's a particular person who has the job of looking after the drugs for the band.
Well, that was Mal.
Mal
Bill
Evans.
Hollingsworth, call the newsroom, please.
And it's true, we used to put, when they used to go through, I mean, I was aware of it, obviously, and when cash had to be advanced for these purchases, we always used to put them down as candies or sweeties or something like that.
I see. Okay, some people considered you as Brian Epstein's chief rescuer. Why would they call you his chief rescuer?
It's not a term I've heard before, but I suppose, I mean, I did stop him from killing himself once, I suppose. I mean, Brian was going through a particularly difficult time, and his addiction to amphetamines was very considerable. And we tried to do something, both his close friends and his family. And on one occasion, I did discover him while I was staying in the house with him. I discovered that he had taken an overdose, and I got him to hospital, and he survived. And subsequent to that, we did, the pressure was heavier, and he did go to a rehabilitation center, which is just shortly before Sgt. Pepper was released.
Cynthia Lennon says that when she was informed of John's impending divorce intentions, in order to speak to John, she had to make an appointment with you. Is that true?
Well, what she had to do is that she couldn't get to John. And it doesn't sound quite as bad as it was, because, I mean, for years I'd been the link between everyone. And I was the easiest link, because I was the one in the office with the hotline on my desk. So she knew that if she called me, that she'd be able to get to John, who would not, she didn't have his number by that time. He'd changed his home number.
So you acted as a go-between.
Yes. But I acted as a go-between, for John's divorce from her, and also Yoko's divorce from her previous husband.
Some say that you molded your whole existence after Brian Epstein. Do you agree?
No, I don't really. I think that Brian was a tremendous person, but I mean, when I met Brian, we were both very young. I don't think that I molded anything on him. Obviously, we influenced each other.
Nat Weiss has said that Brian Epstein defied understanding, that he had a Jekyll and Hyde type character. Do you think so?
Yes, I think that's pretty well put. I mean, I think that Brian was a very serious introvert. I think that he had a lot of scars. I think his homosexuality, his Jewishness, all of these things dwelt on his mind a great deal. And I think that's one of the reasons that he took as many drugs as he did and drank like he did.
You notified McCartney of Epstein's death, and you lived in his home after he died.
I was living in the home at the time, because what had happened was that just before he tried to commit suicide the first time, his doctor had asked me if I would in fact find some excuse of staying with Brian for a while, because they were worried about him, and as I was his closest friend and did have some influence over him, they were hoping that I might be able to keep an eye on him. And so that I was in fact living there when he died, and I moved out shortly afterwards back to my own home.
There's some rumors been going around in some books and in some circles that Brian was murdered. Do you think there's any chance that Brian might have been murdered?
No, I mean, I know that was in shout. It seems to me the most ludicrous thing, and I'm surprised actually that it was in shout, because Philip Norman is a very good writer and a very reputable writer. And I think that he was a victim of the fact that he couldn't get to any original information. None of the Beatles nor the Inner Circle would see him, as they wouldn't see any writer. And I think that somehow Philip was seriously misled with this, and it's ludicrous. I mean, I was with Brian all of that time.
Well, but knowing what Brian had gone through, and several escapades throughout the Beatle years, would you have been surprised if Brian had been murdered?
Yes, because we weren't living, London wasn't violent. I don't think that through the suggestion, I think, was through the problem with the merchandising and the mess up with that. There would have been some, but I mean, nobody could have got access to the house or anything like that without us knowing.
Paul McCartney invited you into his home to be interviewed for this book. What was his attitude?
Well, he was very supportive of the book, as were the other three. They did believe there was a great need for a definitive book with warts and all, as some people say, because they wanted to put to rest a lot of inaccuracies, such as the things that have been in Philip Norman's book, and hopefully once and for all set the record straight, and then they could relax, and that would be it.
Why did Paul say in a recent interview, in no uncertain terms, your book is a betrayal of the Beatles' trust?
Well, I think because it didn't come out the way Paul wanted. He was very honest with us. He did, to his great credit, never say, don't put this in or don't put that in. I think he was hoping very much that it would come out, he would come out a little better than he did in the book. I don't think he comes out badly, incidentally.
Did any Beatle, Paul in particular, complain about personal financial matters with you, such as McCartney being upset that his relatives borrowed large sums of money from him and never intended to repay?
No, I mean, I don't think that, no, I never was experienced a time when they complained about relatives or money.
Does any of the Beatles collect their own memorabilia?
I think Ringo has pretty good collection of things over the years. Nothing, however, compared with your collection.
Oh. What memorabilia items do you have?
Actually, I have a couple of awards that I picked up on their behalf, which I actually have in my library, and I have a very beautiful sculpture that John had given me, a piece of Steuben. One of the things, my favorite thing, is that 4 statuettes which were made in the likeness of the 4 Beatles as they appear in Yellow Submarine. There were only 5 made by a Scandinavian company. Each of the Beatles had one set, and I had the other set. And I know that each of the Beatles, part of their set is broken, so I in fact have the only complete set.
I think everyone's aware of how much money the Beatles generated by their record sales and movies and publishing and that sort of thing, but how many people that were sidemen for the Beatles benefited financially that are millionaires today maybe that would not have been if it hadn't been for the Beatles?
I don't think anyone benefited that greatly financially, directly, from the Beatles. I mean, when I think of Neil or myself or Mal or people who were there from the beginning to the end, I don't think any of us made any great fortunes during the time that we were with the Beatles. It was part of a career. I mean, I made much more money subsequent, but of course I learnt a lot during the years that I was with Brian and with the Beatles, and which obviously contributed to my later success. Peter Asher certainly made a great success of his career since he left the Beatles, although he didn't make much money with them. Neil, I think, does very well, but then he deserves every penny that he gets.
What was your relationship with Alan Klein when he came in to take over the business matters?
Well, it was him and us, he, as John described him, was John's dog to go and get the others. And of course, the others were all of us, and it was Klein's intention was to dispose of all of us so that he could rule the roost. Paul, objected to all of this and objected to Klein and would never...
Ralph Ealey called 2223, Ralph Ealey 2223.
But of course he was outvoted by the other 3. And Klein did in fact try to get rid of me, and he tried to get rid of Neil, but the Beatles drew the line at that. I mean, they agreed, Ron Cass and Alistair Taylor and a lot of people went, but Klein couldn't move me and he couldn't move Neil.
You held the hotline to the Beatles as far as being able to people to make contact with them. Why were you selected to have such close contact over, say, someone like Ron Cass, who headed the record company?
Well, because I came from Liverpool. I mean, I went back much further. Ron was brought in as a very good and experienced executive to run the record company. He wasn't ever involved with their personal
Joe Hollingsworth,
business.
would you call the newsroom again, please?
I was brought in by Brian, in the beginning of '65, because the business had got too big for him to run on his own, and he didn't want anyone to be near the Beatles.
Bill Montague, call the front desk, please. Bill Montague.
That they were not familiar with. He was very protective of the Beatles. I was somebody that he trusted, and that somebody that they would accept because they knew me from Liverpool and knew that I was an acceptable and honest person, so that I was a suitable candidate for that. And my job was to keep him informed, to be the conduit between them and the office. As I say, Brian was overly protective of them, and of course by that time he'd got a lot of other groups and artists to look after.
Okay, you've told your story now about your life with the Beatles, working with them, and your personal relationship with the Beatles. What can we expect from you in the future? Is it going to be something else Beatle related?
No. As you probably know, I mean, between the time that I left at the end of 70 and when I agreed to write this book during 79, I didn't have any Beatle-related business at all. I mean, that was another part of my life. I went on to do other things. I agreed to write the book. I'm delighted that I did. I'm very proud of the book. It's already been a success in hardback. And I think that once this paperback is successful, I will happily go back to my real business, which is I have a corporate public relations business in New York.
As a wrap-up now, a final question. Brian Epstein died in 1967. Do you think that the course of music history would have been changed in any way had he continued to live?
I think that it's possible that the Beatles would have lasted a little longer if Brian had stayed alive. I think that Klein and all those things may not have happened the way they did, and it was a great
Fran
sadness.
Graves, please call the front desk. Fran Graves.
For us all, not only that we lost Brian, who was a very, very important part of the whole story and certainly contributed to the success, and I think that with him alive, maybe the story would have been a little longer, but eventually I think that John would have been dissatisfied with being a Beatle, and eventually it would have broken up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I wish you much success.
Thank you.
And, one thing, keep that light on just a second, right?
He's a big collector of Beatle memorabilia. He's
Bill Montague, please call the front desk. Bill Montague.
in the
Let's see, maybe we should get out of the mirror.
too much light.
You move over there, great.